Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a stack of source material that's, well, pretty intense. We're looking at global fragility, covering everything from failures in military justice, huge climate disasters, and some really serious political gridlock.
It's definitely a heavy stack, but when you sift through it all, there's this thread that just keeps popping up.
Hmm.
Accountability, or really the lack of it, and how vulnerable our systems are. Our goal here is to pull out the useful insights, how complex systems are struggling under all this pressure and what those weaknesses actually look like around the world.
Okay, let's unpack this. So maybe we start with accountability failures, but on a smaller scale first. There's this case recently concluded involving an ex-sergeant major sentenced to 6 months for sexual assault. The soldier involved tragically later took her own life.
Yeah, and the initial institutional response, that's really the key insight here. It kind of sets the stage for everything else. The sources show the unit first handled the assault with just, quote, minor administrative action.
Minor administrative action.
Right, essentially an apology, a note on the file. And that's the structural failure. Using these minimal sort of decentralized steps to basically sweep a serious failure of leadership under the rug, protecting the institution, not the victim.
And it didn't stop there, did it? The system almost seemed to validate that initial response because he was later promoted to Warrant Officer 1. Only after that did the eventual sentencing happen. It really paints a picture of how these systems can use process to shield power.
Exactly, and that failure, that playbook, it just scales up dramatically, tragically, when we shift focus to Sudan.
Right. The Civil War started there in April 2023. The UN is now calling it the world's largest humanitarian crisis. The numbers are just staggering. Over 150,000 deaths, 12 million people forced from their home.
12 million.
Yeah. And the conflict just hit another grim point recently with the capture of El Fasher by the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF.
Which basically cements the country's split, geographically speaking. The RSF controls the west, much of Kordofan. The army holds Khartoum, the capital, and the central and eastern areas. And just the fall of El Fasher alone pushed another 60,000 people to flee.
So this is where accountability comes back in, but in a very political way. The RSF, facing a lot of international heat over atrocities, arrested one of their own fighters, a guy named Abu Lulu, identified by BBC Verify, accused of summary executions.
Yeah, they even released footage of the arrest. But, human rights campaigners immediately raised red flags. Deeply skeptical, they're calling it a pretty transparent PR stunt.
A PR stunt, to sort of pin the blame on one guy.
Exactly. To deflect from what they allege are systematic massacres, maybe even genocide, by framing it as the work of a single rogue commander rather than policy.
And did people buy it?
Doesn't seem like it. Researchers point out that many Sudanese saw right through it. There was this counter hashtag that popped up, "You are all Abu Lulu," basically saying arresting one guy is a joke when the problem is systemic.
And the sources, they back up that claim of systematic violence.
They do. They detail mass killings, ethnic targeting, horrific reports of rape of women and girls at gunpoint, even vehicles, driving over civilian corpses on escape routes. It paints a grim picture of calculated brutality.
And the impact on just basic services. Healthcare.
Devastating. The WHO confirmed 460 patients were killed in attacks on the Saudi maternity hospital in El Fasher, and aid groups like MSF. They reported that literally 100% of the children under 5 they screened arriving in displacement camps from that area were malnourished.
Wow.
So the connection is pretty stark, isn't it? Whether it's a small military unit or a massive civil war, when the system fails on accountability right at the start, the human cost just spirals outwards, pushing everything closer to collapse.
That cost. It feels almost impossible to quantify. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Still talking about overwhelming threats, but this time driven by, well, the environment itself, accelerated by us. Climate instability. What we're seeing here is how climate vulnerability traps governments in this endless, exhausting cycle of just rebuilding.
Yeah, we're looking at Hurricane Melissa, a Category 5 monster that just ripped through the Caribbean, Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic. And critically, it tied a record from way back in 1935 for the most intense Atlantic storm ever to make landfall. That tells you something about the scale of the stress tests we're facing now.
And the sources take us right into it, to Black River, Jamaica. The word used is just annihilation.
Yeah, almost every building lost its roof. The town center looks like a demolition site. Roads totally wrecked, silt, rubble, potholes everywhere. Just impassable.
There's some personal stories in there too, right, showing the sheer intensity.
There are. There's this one fisherman, Alan Daly, 67 years old. He survived Hurricane Gilbert back in the day, a really bad one. But he said Melissa brought the hardest wind I ever felt in my life. Said it made his concrete foundation actually move.
Wow. Concrete foundation moving.
It just shows that our old standards, our infrastructure built for past realities, they're often just not up to scratch against these modern Cat 5s. They're failing the stress test.
And when this happens again and again,
Hmm.
what does that do to an economy? Especially a smaller island nation. There's another story, Owen Clark, a hotel owner. He's facing rebuilding for the second year in a row after Hurricane Beryl hit last summer.
Right. And the cost, they're talking billions upon billions. For a small nation, how do you even begin to think about adapting, about building resilience, when you're constantly just trying to recover from the last hit? How do you pivot from pure survival?
So it's a resource drain.
Absolutely. The Jamaica Environment Trust, looking at Melissa's strength, its slow movement, they called it clear signs of climate change. They note that Category 4 and 5 storms are just getting more frequent. So the crucial insight for you, the listener, is that this locks a nation's economy into constantly bleeding resources. They have to spend on immediate disaster relief, which means the money needed for long-term investment, climate-proofing homes, building resilient infrastructure. It just isn't there.
That kind of structural instability, being locked in that cycle. It leads us pretty neatly into our next area, democracy and paralysis, where political systems are buckling, often because of their own internal rules or actions. Let's start with Bangladesh. It's a really complex situation there regarding electoral legitimacy.
Yeah, it really is. So remember the student-led uprising in 2024? And the crackdown afterwards, the UN linked it to maybe up to 1,400 deaths. Well, following that, the interim government, which is led by Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus, has essentially banned the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's party, the Awami League, or AL, from all political activity. And crucially, they're banned from the upcoming elections in February 2026.
Banned completely, a major political party.
Practically, yes. And this sparks a huge debate. On one side, you have electoral experts who argue, look, the AL brought it on themselves. They point to alleged criminal activities, governance failures, saying they need to be held accountable.
Okay, so that's one perspective. What's the counter-argument?
Well, Hasina herself calls the ban unjust. But beyond that, analysts and international human rights groups are warning this move could actually undermine the whole point returning to a genuine multi-party democracy. They argue you can't just disenfranchise a massive chunk of the population. The AL, even when they lost elections previously, still pulled in over 22 million votes.
22 million.
Yeah. So when you ban a party that large by what's essentially an executive order, you might be swapping one kind of instability, say the AL's alleged corruption, for another. The instability that comes from mass alienation, from millions feeling like they have no voice.
Wait, but if the goal is to fix chronic corruption, isn't sticking to that principle of justice, even if it means blocking millions of voters for now? Isn't that necessary? Maybe the failure was in the original electoral process that allowed things to get so bad.
And that hits the absolute core question here, doesn't it? What do you prioritize? Perfect, maybe absolute, justice, or functional stability? If getting that justice means excluding one of the two biggest political players in the country, does the resulting solution actually have the legitimacy it needs to stick? And there are wider fears, too. Some activists are already calling to ban another party, the Jatia party, fearing they're just AL proxies.
Yeah.
If that happens, well, you go from multi-party democracy to basically no-party rule very, very quickly.
That tension between following the rules, maybe for good reason, and achieving actual stability.
Yeah.
We see a similar dynamic, though maybe playing out differently in the Balkans, right? In Kosovo.
Exactly. Kosovo's situation is about paralysis caused by sticking rigidly to the rules. It's been 9 months since their election, and Albin Kurti's party still hasn't managed to get the 61 votes needed in parliament to form a new government, so everything's just stuck.
And that gridlock has real-world consequences, doesn't it? Financial ones.
Oh, absolutely devastating consequences. Because there's no new government, there's no new budget for 2026. And that means public sector salaries for hundreds of thousands of people, civil servants, doctors, teachers, they're blocked. Social welfare payments, too, just stopped.
Wow. And it goes beyond domestic finances, right? There's international aid involved.
Huge international aid. This institutional crisis means Kosovo can't ratify the EU's Reform and Growth Facility. We're talking over 880 million euros blocked. And you need to understand, this isn't just cash. It's funding specifically designed to help them strengthen institutions, reform the judiciary, build critical infrastructure, things they desperately need.
So by sticking to the letter of the law needing exactly 61 votes, The state has effectively frozen itself. It's blocking its own essential services and massive external help meant for long-term stability.
Precisely. And there's another layer. Legally, the current caretaker government doesn't really have the political mandate to carry on crucial negotiations like the dialogue with Serbia, especially on issues with long-lasting consequences. So diplomatically, they're stuck in a holding pattern too.
Okay, wow. Before we wrap things up, let's touch on two quick but really cutting-edge insights from the material. They touch on global connectivity and maybe future systems. First up, something about making AI greener.
Yeah, more energy efficient. It's fascinating. Researchers have developed these biologically inspired electronic neurons. The big deal here is resource use. Think about it. Current large AI models need these enormous server farms consuming vast amounts of power. That's just not sustainable if we want to scale AI further.
So they're trying to build computer components that work more like actual brain cells to save power.
That's the idea, basically. Designing electronics that mimic biological synapses, not just traditional silicon switches. The goal is compact, low-energy AI systems. It's about making tech smarter by making it more, well, natural and less resource-hungry. Crucial if this tech is going to be truly global.
And sticking with natural systems, there's this other concept mentioned, forest's misty breath. Sounds quite poetic.
It does, but it's got really profound implications for policy and how interconnected we are. It's about how moisture released by forests, their breath actually travels across borders, sometimes thousands of miles, to provide rainfall essential for farming in completely different countries.
So trees in one country, water crops in another. Is there a specific example?
Yes, the sources highlight the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. The moisture it releases is vital for agriculture way down in Peru and Argentina.
Hundreds, maybe thousands of miles away.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that ecological systems don't care about our political borders. Deforestation in one place can directly hit food security somewhere else entirely. It connects environmental policy in, say, Brazil, directly to the dinner tables in Argentina.
That's a really critical perspective.
Okay.
We've covered a huge amount today, from, like you said, the micro level of tiny electronic neurons and this cross-border forest moisture, all the way up to massive systemic failures in military justice, the brutal cycle of climate rebuilding in the Caribbean, and this self-inflicted political paralysis in Bangladesh and Kosovo.
Yeah, and the thread running through it all is this constant tension, right? Whether it's war or a hurricane or political deadlock, how do states actually handle these overwhelming crises? How do they maintain accountability without accidentally creating a whole new crisis in the process?
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, taking this all in?
Well, if you look really closely at what's happening in Bangladesh and Kosovo, you see authorities taking drastic steps, banning a major party in one case, sticking to rules that cause total gridlock in the other. And they're doing it, arguably, to fix past problems or prevent things from getting worse. This raises an important question.
Oh, yes.
When that pursuit of what seems like pure, maybe narrowly defined justice ends up disenfranchising millions of people, or it halts almost €1 billion in critical aid, what's the real cost? You know, at what point does the attempt to get a perfectly correct political resolution actually become the system's biggest weakness? Maybe the lesson here is that sometimes political function, democratic stability, maybe it requires solutions that aren't perfect, but they are actually workable, executable.
Definitely food for thought. That's all the time we have for this deep dive into global fragility and those systemic links. We hope this leaves you feeling better informed and maybe seeing some new connections. We'll be back soon with another stack.